A civilization or civilization is any complex society characterized by urban development, social stratification, symbolic communication forms, and a perceived separation from and domination over the natural environment by a cultural elite. Civilizations are intimately associated with and often further defined by other socio-politico-economic characteristics, including centralization, the domestication of both humans and other organisms, specialization of labor, culturally ingrained ideologies of progress and supremacism, monumental architecture, taxation, societal dependence upon farming as an agricultural practice, and expansionism. Historically, a civilization was a so-called advanced culture in contrast to more supposedly primitive cultures. In this broad sense, a civilization contrasts with non-centralized feudal or tribal societies, including the cultures of nomadic pastoralists or hunter-gatherers. As an uncountable noun, civilization also refers to the process of a society developing into a centralized, urbanized, stratified structure. Civilizations are organized in densely populated settlements divided into hierarchical social classes with a ruling elite and subordinate urban and rural populations, which engage in intensive agriculture, mining, small-scale manufacture and trade. Civilization concentrates power, extending human control over the rest of nature, including over other human beings. The earliest emergence of civilizations is generally associated with the final stages of the Neolithic Revolution, culminating in the relatively rapid process of state formation, a political development associated with the appearance of a governing elite. This Neolithic technology and lifestyle was established first in the Middle East, and later in the Yangtze and Yellow River basins in China, and later spread. But similar revolutions also began independently from 7000 BCE in such places as the Norte Chico civilization in Peru and Mesoamerica at the Balsas River. These were among the 6 civilizations worldwide that arose independently. Mesopotamia is the site of the earliest developments of the Neolithic Revolution from around 10,000 BC. It has been identified as having inspired some of the most important developments in human history, including the invention of the wheel, the planting of the first cereal crops, and the development of cursive script, mathematics, astronomy and agriculture. The Neolithic Revolution in turn was dependent upon the development of sedentarism, the domestication of grains and animals, and the development lifestyles which allowed economies of scale and the accumulation of surplus production by certain social sectors. The transition from complex cultures to civilizations, while still disputed, seems to be associated with the development of state structures, in which power was further monopolized by an elite ruling class. Towards the end of the Neolithic period, various Chalcolithic civilizations began to rise in various cradles from around 3300 BCE. Chalcolithic civilizations, as defined above, also developed in pre-Columbian Americas and, despite an early start in Egypt, Aksum and Kush, much later in Iron Age sub-Saharan Africa. The Bronze Age collapse was followed by the Iron Age around 1200 BCE, during which a number of new civilizations emerged, culminating in the Axial Age transition to classical civilization. A major technological and cultural transition to modernity began approximately 1500 CE in Western Europe, and from this beginning new approaches to science and law spread rapidly around the world. History of the concept. The English word civilization comes from the 16th century French civiliser, from Latin civilize, related to civis and civitas. The fundamental treatise is Norbert Elias's The Civilizing Process, which traces social mores from medieval courtly society to the early modern period. In The Philosophy of Civilization, Albert Schweitzer outlines 2 opinions. one purely material and the other material and ethical. He said that the world crisis was from humanity losing the ethical idea of civilization, the sum total of all progress made by man in every sphere of action and from every point of view insofar as the progress helps towards the spiritual perfecting of individuals as the progress of all progress. Adjectives like civility developed in the mid-16th century. The abstract noun civilization, meaning civilized condition, came in the 1760s, again from French. The first known use in French is in 1757, by Victor Riqueter, Marquis de Mirabeau, and the first use in English is attributed to Adam Ferguson, who in his 1767 essay on the history of civil society wrote, "Not only the individual advances from infancy to manhood, but the species itself from rudeness to civilization. The word was therefore opposed to barbarism or rudeness, in the active pursuit of progress characteristic of the Age of Enlightenment." In the late 1700s and early 1800s, during the French Revolution, civilization was said singular, never plural, and meant the progress of humanity as a whole. This is still the case in French. The use of civilizations as a countable noun was in occasional use in the 19th century, but has become much more common in the later 20th century. Sometimes just meaning culture. Only in this generalized sense does it become possible to speak of a medieval civilization, which in Elias's sense would have been an oxymoron. Already in the 18th century, civilization was not always seen as an improvement. One historically important distinction between culture and civilization is from the writings of Rousseau, particularly his work about education. Émile. Here, civilization, being more rational and socially driven, is not fully in accord with human nature, and human wholeness is achievable only through the recovery of or approximation to an original prediscursive or pre-rational natural unity. From this, a new approach was developed, especially in Germany, first by Johann Gottfried Herder, and later by philosophers such as Kierkegaard and Nietzsche. This sees cultures as natural organisms, not defined by conscious, rational, deliberative acts, but a kind of pre-rational, folk spirit. Civilization, in contrast, though more rational and more successful in material progress, is unnatural and leads to vices of social life, such as guile, hypocrisy, envy, and avarice. In World War II, Leo Strauss, having fled Germany, argued in New York that this opinion of civilization was behind Nazism and German militarism and nihilism. Characteristics. Social scientists such as V. Gordon Childe have named a number of traits that distinguish a civilization from other kinds of society. Civilizations have been distinguished by their means of subsistence, types of livelihood, settlement patterns, forms of government, social stratification, economic systems, literacy, and other cultural traits. All civilizations have depended on agriculture for subsistence. Grain farms can result in accumulated storage and a surplus of food, particularly when people use intensive agricultural techniques such as artificial fertilization, irrigation, and crop rotation. It is possible but more difficult to accumulate horticultural production, and so civilizations based on horticultural gardening have been very rare. Grain surpluses have been especially important because they can be stored for a long time. A surplus of food permits some people to do things besides produce food for a living. Early civilizations included soldiers, artisans, priests and priestesses, and other people with specialized careers. A surplus of food results in a division of labor and a more diverse range of human activity, a defining trait of civilizations. However, in some places hunter-gatherers have had access to food surpluses, such as among some of the indigenous peoples of the Pacific Northwest and perhaps during the Mesolithic Natufian culture. It is possible that food surpluses and relatively large-scale social organization and division of labor predates plant and animal domestication. Civilizations have distinctly different settlement patterns from other societies. The word civilization is sometimes simply defined as living in cities. Non-farmers tend to gather in cities to work and to trade. Compared with other societies, civilizations have a more complex political structure, namely the state. State societies are more stratified than other societies. There is a greater difference among the social classes. The ruling class, normally concentrated in the cities, has control over much of the surplus and exercises its will through the actions of a government or bureaucracy. Morton Fried, a conflict theorist, and Elman Service, an integration theorist, have classified human cultures based on political systems and social inequality. This system of classification contains 4 categories: hunter-gatherer bands, which are generally egalitarian; horticultural, pastoral societies in which there are generally 2 inherited social classes, chief and commoner; highly stratified structures, or chiefdoms, with several inherited social classes: king, noble, freeman, serf and slave; civilizations, with complex social hierarchies and organized, institutional governments. Economically, civilizations display more complex patterns of ownership and exchange than less organized societies. Living in one place allows people to accumulate more personal possessions than nomadic people. Some people also acquire landed property, or private ownership of the land. Because a percentage of people in civilizations do not grow their own food, they must trade their goods and services for food in a market system, or receive food through the levy of tribute, redistributive taxation, tariffs or tithes from the food-producing segment of the population. Early human cultures functioned through a gift economy supplemented by limited barter systems. By the early Iron Age, contemporary civilizations developed money as a medium of exchange for increasingly complex transactions. To oversimplify, in a village the potter makes a pot for the brewer and the brewer compensates the potter by giving him a certain amount of beer. In a city, the potter may need a new roof, the roofer may need new shoes, the cobbler may need new horseshoes, the blacksmith may need a new coat, and the tanner may need a new pot. These people may not be personally acquainted with one another and the needs may not occur all at the same time. A monetary system is a way of organizing these obligations to ensure that they are fulfilled. From the days of the earliest monetarized civilizations, monopolistic controls of monetary systems have benefited the social and political elites. Writing, developed first by people in Sumer, is considered a hallmark of civilization and appears to accompany the rise of complex administrative bureaucracies or the conquest state. Traders and bureaucrats relied on writing to keep accurate records. Like money, writing was necessitated by the size of the population of a city and the complexity of its commerce among people who are not all personally acquainted with each other. However, writing is not always necessary for civilization. The Inca civilization of the Andes did not use writing at all, but it uses a complex recording system consisting of chords and nodes instead, the quipus, and it still functioned as a civilized society. Aided by their division of labor and central government planning, civilizations have developed many other diverse cultural traits. These include organized religion, development in the arts, and countless new advances in science and technology. Through history, successful civilizations have spread, taking over more and more territory, and assimilating more and more previously uncivilized people. Nevertheless, some tribes or people remain uncivilized even to this day. These cultures are called by some primitive, a term that is regarded by others as pejorative. Primitive implies in some way that a culture is, first, that it has not changed since the dawn of humanity, though this has been demonstrated not to be true. Specifically, as all of today's cultures are contemporaries, today's so-called primitive cultures are in no way antecedent to those we consider civilized. Anthropologists today use the term non-literate to describe these peoples. Civilization has been spread by colonization, invasion, religious conversion, the extension of bureaucratic control and trade, and by introducing agriculture and writing to non-literate peoples. Some non-civilized people may willingly adapt to civilized behavior, but civilization is also spread by the technical, material and social dominance that civilization engenders. Assessments of what level of civilization a polity has reached are based on comparisons of the relative importance of agricultural as opposed to trade or manufacturing capacities, the territorial extensions of its power, the complexity of its division of labor, and the carrying capacity of its urban centers. Secondary elements include a developed transportation system, writing, standardized measurement, currency, contractual and tort-based legal systems, architecture, mathematics, scientific understanding, metallurgy, political structures, and organized religion. Traditionally, polities that managed to achieve notable military, ideological and economic power defined themselves as civilized, as opposed to other societies or human grouping which lay outside their sphere of influence, calling the latter barbarians, savages, and primitives, while in a modern-day context, civilized people have been contrasted with indigenous people or tribal societies. Cultural identity. Civilization can also refer to the culture of a complex society, not just the society itself. Every society, civilization or not, has a specific set of ideas and customs, and a certain set of manufactures and arts that make it unique. Civilizations tend to develop intricate cultures, including a state-based decision-making apparatus, literature, professional art, architecture, organized religion, and complex customs of education, coercion and control associated with maintaining the elite. The intricate culture associated with civilization has a tendency to spread to and influence other cultures, sometimes assimilating them into the civilization. Many civilizations have actually large cultural spheres containing many nations and regions. The civilization in which someone lives is that person's broadest cultural identity. Many historians have focused on these broad cultural spheres and have treated civilizations as discrete units. Early 20th century philosopher Oswald Spengler uses the German word culture for what many call a civilization. Spengler believes a civilization's coherence is based on a single primary cultural symbol. Cultures experience cycles of birth, life, decline, and death, often supplanted by a potent new culture, formed around a compelling new cultural symbol. Spengler states, civilization is the beginning of the decline of a culture as the most external and artificial states of which a species of developed humanity is capable. This unified culture concept of civilization also influenced the theories of historian Arnold J. Toynbee in the mid-20th century. Toynbee explored civilization processes in his multi-volume A Study of History, which traced the rise and, in most cases, the decline of 21 civilizations and 5 arrested civilizations. Civilizations generally declined and fell, according to Toynbee, because of the failure of a creative minority, through moral or religious decline, to meet some important challenge, rather than mere economic or environmental causes. Samuel P. Huntington defines civilization as the highest cultural grouping of people and the broadest level of cultural identity people have short of that, which distinguishes humans from other species. Huntington's theories about civilizations are discussed below. Complex systems. Another group of theorists, making use of systems theory, looks at a civilization as a complex system, i.e., a framework by which a group of objects can be analyzed that work in concert to produce some result. Civilizations can be seen as networks of cities that emerge from pre-urban cultures, and are defined by the economic, political, military, diplomatic, social, and cultural interactions among them. Any organization is a complex social system, and a civilization is a large organization. Systems theory helps guard against superficial but misleading analogies in the study and description of civilizations. Systems theorists look at many types of relations between cities, including economic relations, cultural exchanges, and political, diplomatic, military relations. These spheres often occur on different scales. For example, trade networks were, until the 19th century, much larger than either cultural spheres or political spheres. Extensive trade routes, including the Silk Road through Central Asia and Indian Ocean sea routes linking the Roman Empire, Persian Empire, India, and China, were well established 2,000 years ago, when these civilizations scarcely shared any political, diplomatic, military, or cultural relations. The first evidence of such long-distance trade is in the ancient world. During the Uruk period, Guillermo Algés has argued that trade relations connected Egypt, Mesopotamia, Iran and Afghanistan. Resin found later in the royal tombs of it is suggested was traded northwards from Mozambique. Many theorists argue that the entire world has already become integrated into a single, world system, a process known as globalization. Different civilizations and societies all over the globe are economically, politically, and even culturally interdependent in many ways. There is debate over when this integration began, and what sort of integration, cultural, technological, economic, political, or military diplomatic, is a key indicator in determining the extent of a civilization. David Wilkinson has proposed that economic and military diplomatic integration of the Mesopotamian and Egyptian civilizations resulted in the creation of what he calls the Central Civilization, around 1500 BCE. Central Civilization later expanded to include the entire Middle East and Europe, and then expanded to a global scale with European colonization, integrating the Americas, Australia, China and Japan by the 19th century. What Huntington calls the clash of civilizations might be characterized by Wilkinson as a clash of cultural spheres within a single global civilization. Others point to the Crusades as the first step in globalization. The more conventional viewpoint is that networks of societies have expanded and shrunk since ancient times, and that the current globalized economy and culture is a product of recent European colonialism.